We have a poem by Gwendolyn Brooks, Boy Breaking Glass. Just a little bit of bibliographical background here. It's dedicated to Mark Crawford, and that's clear in the text of the poem. A black writer and editor of a magazine, a periodical called Time Capsule. And he was the one who suggested, as she says here, for whom the commission, suggested that she write a poem that would speak about or for African-American young people in the 60s, quote, surviving inequity and white power. That was the commission, in a way. It was published in Negro Digest in June of 1967. That's an issue that I've looked at, and it's partly a black arts issue, and we're not going to necessarily define that here, but it's partly a movement piece. It partly fits with it, and it also partly goes in its own way. Also, I'll just note that boys breaking glass is something, it's a trope that Gwendolyn Brooks uses in several of her poems, and typically, not maybe as much here, although we can talk about it, it's typically a chance for her to critique the inner city architecture devised by people who basically saw windows as a problem. This is something that to this day cities make the mistake of, and creating an architecture even in schools where it's more of a penitentiary-like windowless thing. So it's partly a critique of that. And I'm going to read it and then give way to you guys to invite you to say things about it. We won't do a close reading in order, but we want to hear your ideas, and then we can respond to each other. Boy Breaking Glass. To Mark Crawford, for whom the commission. Whose broken window is a cry of art, success that winks aware as elegance, as a treasonable faith, is raw, is sonic, is old-eyed premier. Our beautiful flaw and terrible ornament, our barbarous and metal little man. I shall create, if not a note, a whole, if not an overture, a desecration, full of pepper and light and salt and night and cargoes. Don't go down the plank if you see there's no extension. Each to his grief, each to his loneliness and fidgety revenge. Nobody knew where I was, and now I am no longer there. The only sanity is a cup of tea. The music is in minors. Each one other is having different weather. It was you who threw away my name, and this is everything I have for me. Who has not Congress, lobster, love, luau, the Regency Room, the Statue of Liberty, runs? A sloppy amalgamation, a mistake, a cliff, a hymn, a snare, and an exceeding sun. Wow. My favorite Brooks poem. I'm so glad we're talking about it. I can't wait to hear what you think. Amaris, any thoughts? Start anywhere?
Yeah, I feel that a recurring theme, of course, in this poem is the sense of racial otherness and the frustration of not having a name, of being invisible in a culture. And I feel like the first line really exemplifies that by starting with a subordinate clause, and that whose is both a question of whose broken window. It kind of calls into being that absence from the start. It's an art of protest. It's an art of, I guess, a calling to like a collectivity for recognition.
So collectivity in formal terms would be ironic or paradoxical because it's a fragmentation that calls for collective.
She's created this way to talk about the boy breaking glass in a way that respects his subjectivity by talking about each one other as having different weather. It's almost like saying, I couldn't begin to tell you the individual things that are happening to each of these individual people. All I know is that they're all having they're all in different circumstances, they're all in different weather.
Can you, Kamara, start, and then everybody else can join in, to paraphrase or close read the second stanza, which is the quote. I'll read it again. I shall create, if not a note, a whole, if not an overture, a desecration. You want to try that?
In some ways, this line is kind of filled with hope that creation will happen anyway. But like we talked about in the beginning, what this art is an art made from anger and made from lacking. And so I shall create, I think, is one of the most hopeful lines. But then when you go to, if not an overture, a desecration.
Which means what? Translate that. I'm not going to write a symphony. I'm not that kind of artist. Don't have those
type of tools.
I'm going to break a window, so my desecration is my art. How controversial is it? Was it? Could it be? Right? Because we don't have to be too specifically historical here. For Gwendolyn Brooks, the eminent, by this point, eminent poet, to be so sympathetic to a vandal, I guess the police would say, at best. The kindest thing the police would say about this kid is a vandal. Breaking a window, breaking a glass, presumably out of anger, frustration, claiming it's art, and then Gwen Brooks says, I'm going to write a poem in which I not only am sympathetic to this act of this boy, which is an illegal act, breaking someone's property, presumably, but I'm going to call it art. How do we, can we reproduce the conditions where that is a controversial or radical statement about art? It's very interesting, isn't it?
Well, I say do it, first of all.
You, Anna, says go for it,
But also because for someone to tell her, some grumpy poet person to tell her not to do that.
Tell Brooks, how could you be supporting this radical act of destruction?
I would say that we cheered for this when the Dadaists did it.
Yes. We were all rad and cool when Duchamp, when fragmentation was all the rage, when Williams was doing the fragmentation. And what Brooks does that's so brilliant and powerful for me is that she takes what we've learned about the importance of fragmentation and its proximity to the way modern life is lived and has unneutralized it or radicalized it to the point where this is a political and ethical moment in Negro Digest in 1967, saying what we learned from fragmentation, we're now going to get to apply to a real situation. And if you really want to be radical, you 19 teens and 20s modernists, you will come along and see fragmentation as art because it was then. I'm just sort of elaborating what you said. Lily, you're nodding. Do you like that strategy?
Yeah, well, yes, I do. And I also think, politically, there's a quote from Martin Luther King that I'm not going to try to quote because I'll butcher it, but something like, riot is the voice of the unheard, or this is the language of the unheard. And so I think this takes it an even step further, saying rioting or destroying property and things like that is not only a language, but it's communicating something. It's going beyond communicating something. It's actually a statement of art and of politics.
An expression.
Yeah.
So, Maurice, I'm just going to put you on the spot here. Let's do a close reading of If Not a Note, a Whole.
So if not a text, a work of art as we traditionally conceive of it, then a broken window, a hole in the wall.
Or if not noise, then silence.
If not noise and silence, if not of writing, then an absence. Right? A reversal of creation. This is an uncreation. But an uncreation gets to count as a creation. That's the radical, that's what she's saying about poetry. I'm sorry, Lily, go ahead.
No, or just if not conventionally defined single unit of a masterwork, note goes with overture and whole goes with desecration, kind of. So
note goes with overture, so it's musical, and take overture and draw a line to music is in minors. You were going to do that.
Oh, no, I wasn't.
Okay, I did it.
Good.
I'm proud of myself. A minor key, off rhyme, shattered harmonics, minority. Music is in minors. The music of now, Boy Breaking Glass. Can you hear it? Can you hear the symphony? Can you hear the anger? Can you hear the expression? Don't think the kid is not artistic. She's saying, I hear, but you just have to learn to hear the minor key. That's really great. Now, what are we going to do with the ending, though? What are we going to do with the ending? Because as in the poem by Gertrude Stein about the car accident, Let Us Describe, which is also a meta poem, there, everything falls apart at the end. And there is a similar, a hymn, a snare, and an exceeding sun is almost like a quotation from that piece. So what do we do with the breakdown at the end here? Or if you don't let me tell you, I don't want to be the Whitmanian gnat in your ear telling you that it must break down. Assuming it's a breakdown or not, what do we do with the ending? And you love the ending?
I do.
Really?
I really, that first, I really love the way that she structured it. So there's that opening line, who has not Congress lobster love. The subject and verb is sort of like who has runs. Or who has not run, sorry. So, but
Whoever doesn't have this stuff
runs. But it's like a
As
total
in
run-on.
runs away
It's
or
also,
runs for office?
Right, but it's also a total run-on sentence. And
nice.
it's like listing these things that are equated with whatever the opposite of a sloppy amalgamation is, like being proper and like conventionally defined success, maybe. So those, but like incorporating those into that run-on sentence that starts the breaking down into fragments is really cool.
Dave Umries, Dave, start with you. What do you do with the last?
A snare is also a trap. I find that to be the most important part of it because I love the way this can be read. A hymn as in hopeful, a snare as in drum, with the music from above, and an exceeding sun, that could be hopeful, but really a hymn is something you can resort to when you're desperate and hopeless.
We take exceeding sun, we draw back to light. We take hymn and we draw back to overture, note, music, minor key, right? So she seems to be beautifully summing up, and yet it's fragmented. It's like what you want a modern poet to do. I mean, it's like perfect. Let me just sort of throw out an idea and get final reactions to it. D.H. Mellom has written a really good book about Brooks, and so it's not my idea, it's Mellom's idea. And Mellom observes that there's a predominance of iambic pentameter at the beginning. It's written not in the form of a sonnet by any means, although if you take the first 14 lines, it is sonnet-like. But I'm going to emphasize some of the regularity of the metrics and then tell you what Mellom says, and then you can react. Whose broken window is a cry of art, success that winks aware. Now that's a regular line, but not pentameter. Success that winks aware. As elegance as a treasonable faith. Is raw, is sonic, is old-eyed premier. This is Shakespearean pentameter. Our beautiful flaw and terrible ornament, our barbarous and metal little man. The words are a little modern, but the metrics are very regular. I shall create, if not a note, a whole, if not an overture, a desecration, full of pepper and light and salt and night and cargoes. Mellom observes that the predominance of the iambic pentameter makes you feel like you are in the presence of someone using metrics to make a sonnet. Boy breaking glass is an ongoing, as Kamara said, an ongoing activity. And the poem, in a sense, the boy is basically throwing a rock through traditional meter, throwing a rock through the glass, the beautiful glass of traditional poetry. And so Mellom eventually calls it a shattered sonnet as the meter changes completely and falls apart at the end. So it becomes a political intervention, a statement, a controversial statement that there is an ethics behind modern fragmentation and that we ought to be consistent, as Anna said, we ought to affirm what this boy is doing, and then in the end uses that Steinian technique of falling apart in order to be a meta-poem. Because people not seeing this as art are going to go and beat this kid up or club him down or arrest him or treat him not as an artist. If an artist is out there doing something, at least the society, not the police, alas, but the society would think twice. Well, this is an artistic expression. This is free expression. I think that's what she's saying. Free expression, free verse, break it down, solidarity. That's, we've sort of made that point a few times, but it's worth repeating. Lily, final thought here?
Going along with the reading of the Shattered Sonnet, I think this second to last stanza, it was you who threw away my name, and this is everything I have for me. Maybe we can think of this is like a statement that the boy is saying to the tradition of poetry. Like, if he is indeed throwing that rock through the sonnet or through like a white male poetic tradition, saying like, you guys threw me under the bus, and like now this could be taken as a more sort of like meta-poetic like this act of throwing this rock or this new poetic tradition maybe that Gwendolyn Brooks is helping establish. Like, this is what I have for me and my subjectivity, because I don't want to follow directly from what you were doing.
Really well put. Thank you. Kamara?
An exceeding sun is what I come back to all the time, and now I'm thinking of it more and more as an exceeding S-O-N, exceeding sun as in the boy, and
She makes that pun in other poems, so that's totally legit.
so if exceeding is the adjective of very great sun, it almost turns up at the end and says like this boy, this sun is shining through the poem, like there's some type of hope because he's reaching you. Yeah,
Very
I like
cool.
the ending.
He's almost the little tippler, leaning against the giant sun. We've done really well with this. I'll just add the obvious, which is that I think Gwendolyn Brooks is teaching us how to learn to listen to the dissonance, how to learn to listen to the non-harmonics, because the music is now in the minors. And if you aren't able to hear that, if you cannot hear a cry of art, it may not be art. A broken window in a city of turmoil may or may not be arguably art, but it is a cry of art. And a cry of art can itself be an art, and we need to learn how to listen to it.